What do we have to do to make sure our message gets through? When it comes to leadership acoustics, there are 3 things to be aware of if we want to make sure that others hear what we're trying to say. Last week I visited the world-famous Red Rocks Amphitheater near Denver, Colorado. It's the perfect place to talk about what those 3 things are and how to be sure our message is getting across. But as good as this place is, there's also a surprising downside to playing there that we ignore at our own risk. Sound interesting? Let's get started. Hi, I'm Ken from Rapid Start Leadership, where our goal is to help you learn leadership skills, build your influence, and achieve positive results through people. You know, the beautiful and iconic Red Rocks Amphitheater is nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains just outside Denver, Colorado. And it's hosted just about every famous musical act you can think of, from the Beatles and U2 to Radiohead and the Grateful Dead. It's practically a musical rite of passage. If you haven't played here, you haven't made it yet. This place is so highly regarded that Concert Trade magazine Polestar awarded it its Best Small Outdoor Venue Award 11 years in a row. They ended up renaming it the Red Rocks Award and removing Red Rocks from the competition just so other places would have a chance to win. All of which makes it the perfect place to talk about communications and what it takes to communicate effectively as a leader. To do that, we can start by asking, what is it that makes this such a great performance venue? And then, what can we learn from that to improve the power of our own communication? Now, I'm not an acoustics expert, but Michelle Vijan, assistant professor of acoustics and engineering at Pennsylvania State University, does know a thing or two. When she evaluates a venue for the quality of its sound, she looks at 3 things. The first is clarity. You know when you hit the fast food drive-thru and you can't understand what the cashier is trying to tell you through that speaker? Well, it's the opposite of that. In the arena at Red Rocks, it's easy to get a clear sound from the source on stage directly to the listener in the audience. The steep 30-degree rise of the seats means that every single person has direct line of sight to the stage, and the sound doesn't get interrupted, muffled, or distorted on its way from the drum set to your eardrum. For our leadership messages, we want clarity too. And I think that starts with thinking clearly about what it is we're trying to say. As we describe our team's vision, or articulate strategic change we're trying to implement, or reinforce our team's cornerstone values, how we talk about them matters. The simpler and clearer we can make it, the better chance it has of reaching our listener's ear. Clarity also comes from reaching the listener directly. Just as at Red Rocks, the strongest messages are those that are delivered personally. Another way to achieve clarity of signal is to make sure that there's no gap between the words we say and the things we do. Any distance between the two is sure to cause confusion and distort your message. The second thing that Professor Vijan looked at is reverberance, which is the opposite of clarity. It's how sound lingers in space. The problem with reverberance is over time, as the sound bounces around the room, it loses clarity. So you end up with a muted, muddy, echoing effect. In a crowded room, there's a lot to distort the sound and create that sense of background noise that can ultimately interfere with the clarity we seek. At Red Rocks, there's very little to get in the way of sound waves. They either hit your ears or they pass on by out into space. There's no ceiling or back wall to send them bouncing back to you. In leadership communication, I see reverberance as things like speculation and the rumor mill. When leaders stop transmitting, all that remains to be heard is the reverberance, the muddy echo of what was said. And like playing that telephone game, the message will mutate and take on a life of its own. And eventually it can distort and overshadow the original message. To fight this as leaders, we have to continually be sending new and clear signals. Once it's not enough. Instead, we've got to repeat the message frequently to ensure it's heard and not overpowered by inaccurate reverberance. The third way Professor Vijan looks at acoustics in a venue is in terms of envelopment. It's that sense of being surrounded on all sides and in all directions. Enveloping sound comes from the early reflections of sound off just 1 or 2 nearby surfaces. In her research, she found that the very best venues were those that had a good combination of both direct sound and enveloping sound. And further, she found the most powerful enveloping sounds were those perceived to be coming from our sides, not behind or above, but from left and from right. Red Rocks is perfectly situated to do this well with the iconic red sandstone Creation Rock to the north and Ship Rock to the south. Both taller than Niagara Falls, they serve to bounce the sound directly into our ears and envelop us with it. They also serve to prevent outside sounds from getting in and interfering with the experience. As leaders, envelopment means reinforcing that message so it comes across to our listeners in a variety of ways. It's not just giving the same speech over and over. It's using different channels like printed media, letters, signs, social media, images, or video. And we can talk about it to large groups or bring it up in small personal conversations. When we reinforce that clear message and envelop our listeners from all sides and in multiple ways, we make that message all the stronger. The way Red Rocks is set up, it does everything right to help get the message across, and we would do well to do the same. To achieve clarity, we need to keep the message as simple as possible, send it directly, and ensure that there's consistency between what we say and what we do. To combat reverberation, we've got to understand that saying something once is not enough. We've got to repeat that clear message regularly so we don't allow a sound vacuum to form that becomes filled with the muddy echoes of people's impressions of what they thought they heard. And we have to envelop our listeners so they get that message strongly and consistently from a variety of sources. And not just top down, but on their level and from multiple sides, all of which reinforce each other. But even with all its advantages, there's a big surprising downside to performing at Red Rocks, and the best artists work overtime to compensate for it. The problem is, with all that sound getting out there so clearly and directly, very little is bouncing back to them. They have a hard time hearing themselves, and without that feedback, they don't know how well they're playing. So before the show, they attach dozens of onstage microphones to their various instruments and connect those into a PA system directed back at them, all so they can get the feedback they need. And we can take a cue from this as well, because truly effective leadership acoustics requires us to listen. You know, whether performers are doing their show at an outdoor venue like Red Rocks, a major stadium, or a small sound stage, they're constantly adapting what they do to fit the place they are. And the same applies to leadership. If you're interested in learning more about how to lead in a wide variety of circumstances and to make your message as strong as it can be, consider subscribing to this channel for more videos, or visiting rapidstartleadership.com for additional blog posts, online courses, and leadership resources. And wherever you are on your leadership journey, I wish you the very best. Lead on.